Okay, now because it would take me too long to provide feedback for everyone, I provided feedback for some people individually because I thought I could swing it, but then it actually ended up taking me way longer than I have time for, unfortunately. I'd love to give everybody individual feedback, but I'm just going to have to go with group feedback about the common things that were done well and that were missed in some cases. So most of them actually all of them had some really good points in them. And so what I'm going to be talking about here are 3 different areas that I looked at. One is the sub-goals. They need to be there. Some people didn't have them developed enough. Some people did the second thing where it didn't quite reflect the content in the content area, and this was mostly true for the persuasive essays. And then they need to be a component of the larger goal. If the larger goal for like the ocean cases was to describe how physical features of the ocean floor impact waves and currents, some people kind of went in a different direction and just really talked about waves or talked about how energy moves around and things like that. You need to keep it really strongly focused on that upper goal, and what you're trying to do is just break down that goal into its parts. So for example, in the ocean feature case, you should, if the overall goal is to describe how ocean features affect waves and currents, 1 sub-goal should be what are the physical features, 2, how do they affect waves, 3, how do they affect currents. And that's as simple and straightforward as it could be. And then you're thinking about, these are the things I need to cover in order for them to be able to do it when I'm teaching, and these are the things they need to give back to me when they're writing the essay. I'm going to talk about the prompt, and one of the things there is that it needs to get students to give information on all the sub-goals. Some of the prompts did this really well. Some of the prompts kind of just covered part of the goal, so I could answer the question without actually giving you any information on whether I've met that lesson goal. It also needs to reflect the main overall goal, and this again was something that happened a lot in the persuasive essays, where the goal is for them to write a persuasive essay about the coronavirus and what should be done. But a lot of times it became more of an informational essay where they're describing things about the coronavirus, and the goals really should be about the ins and outs of writing a persuasive essay. It could be about the coronavirus, it could be about something else, but it should mostly be about the things you need to do well to write a good persuasive essay. So we'll talk about that. You also need to follow Popham's rules, and actually why don't I just put that in there. Meaning that you should tell them how much they should write, how much it's worth, kind of, how extensive their response should be. A lot of people did it, some people just kind of missed. And there might be reasons for it, but that's one thing that you should have some awareness of when you're writing the prompts. Finally, the rubrics need to use the goal structure. So your sub-goal structure should make up those columns or rows in your actual rubric. If there's a difference between those two things, that's misalignment, and we've talked about that before. One, you need to differentiate levels of success for all of the different things, and some people just filled out one of the columns like I did in the video. If you listen to the video, I said you have to fill out all of them. I was just doing it because I don't want the video to get too long and my file size to get too large by going through all of it. You also need to differentiate, or you need to stick to the goals and only the goals. And so if you, again, don't have a rubric that follows the goal structure or does follow it, but adds a bunch of other stuff in it, you'd have to have really strong justifications for why you did those things. So I'm going to go through each one of these sections, first by starting with some really good examples and then talking about some tips for improvement. Here are some good examples. Actually, I can move these in. For sub-goals, right? For the major goal, students will be able to integrate the 4 sub-goals to construct an effective, persuasive essay on 3 important reasons for practicing social distancing during the current coronavirus pandemic. Sub-goal 1 would be to explain 3 reasons for. It's part of a persuasive essay to make your case. Sub-goal 2, students will be able to compare their view to opposing views using a rebuttal, another part of a persuasive essay. Students will be able to justify their views and provide support. And then students will be able to properly cite the sources and create a citations page. Now, this doesn't have your opening positional statement. It also doesn't have a conclusion in it. But I could say that those are things you covered at a different time. You're focusing on these particular elements this time, and so that makes sense to me. Another example would be students will be able to explain how the social structure of Spanish colonies were caused by religious beliefs and economic practices. Sub-goal 1, got to explain the religious beliefs. 2, you have to explain the economic practices. And then 3, you have to explain how those things actually impacted the structure of the Spanish colonies. You could reconfigure those in different ways, but those kind of break it down and build up to that overall goal. So some tips for improvement. Each one of these either have sub-goals that aren't really that relevant and don't really get you to your overall goal, or they're maybe sometimes missing some things. So like for this first one, the major goal again is that students will be able to describe how the physical features of the ocean floor influences currents and waves. And this first part's really good. Love it. Talking about all the different parts of the seafloor. But then the second thing is that it's all about how they're studied, which was in the content. But as far as your goal here, that's not really relevant. You could add it in, but you're missing the whole connection because these were the only 2 sub-goals about how these things actually impact waves and currents. And so if you wanted to improve this one, you would have another sub-goal about how these different features impact waves, and then another one about how they impact currents. It's pretty good, except these should be separated out into different sub-goals rather than just lumped into one, because that will determine the structure of your rubric. This one is really close, but there should be a more direct tie to how each of these things actually influenced how, in other words, not just the changes that were made to the natives, but how they were caused by their religious beliefs. This one's closer, or maybe even right on. Explain how the resources found in Mexico led to slavery in the Spanish colonies. So when you're thinking about the plantation economy, right, you need slave labor for that in order for it to be or to make it as profitable as possible. In this one here, these sub-goals lead to much more of an informational essay or informative essay than a persuasive, because it's all about what will students be able to do to describe, right? This is the first one's good. Second one, though, saying what you're doing doesn't really have anything to do with how you write a persuasive essay, and grammar and mechanics are good, and it's tied to a persuasive essay, but it's not really telling me about the sub-skills that I need to have about my opening, my supporting, my counter-arguments, using evidence, and my conclusion, and all that sort of stuff. And that's what should really be in there. In this example, we have students will classify how the ocean floor is studied and features of the floor. Again, that one's kind of extra. You don't really need that to answer this question. How the transfer of energy from wind to water creates a wave. That's important too, but we're talking about the physical features of the ocean floor, not the waves. And so again, that's kind of irrelevant. And then students will identify 3 things that affect ocean currents. And these could be things that are on the ocean floor, but not necessarily those, because other things affect ocean currents too. So it needs to be tied in, and these are all kind of extra things that would be interesting, but don't really help you get to where you need to go. Same idea here, talking about the same thing, properties of waves, surface currents as well. I can do this without tying it directly back to the physical features, so I really need to make sure I make those connections super clear. Okay, as far as essay prompts go, here are some real nice ones. There were a lot of really nice ones in there. 1, write a 5-paragraph essay persuading the reader's point of view of the importance of social distancing during the coronavirus pandemic. Include 2 reasons and 1 counterpoint in the essay. So 1, You are telling them to write a persuasive essay. 2, you're telling them how long, and you are saying something about the requirements. This is submitted from somebody who did a different set of materials. But again, 5-paragraph format, giving them guidelines again, because this isn't a language arts class, it's a content area class. Describe the 3 major disagreements the founding fathers had, and so on and so on. Be sure to include important individuals or states on each side of each argument, as well as the lasting solutions for each. Complete your response in 1 to 2 single-spaced pages, and then the point value. So following a lot of Popham's advice there, it's clearly articulated, and it does reflect the sub-goals that were given here very, very well. Finally, this last one, did the coronavirus being an airborne virus, a lot of backstory. Now, the reason I put this one in here is that if you were giving this as an in-class thing, and maybe you talked about it, you still want to focus on writing the essay, and so you might load some of the information about the coronavirus in the prompt. And this is one of those things that if you're worried about students having the right amount of background knowledge, you can do, kind of like we've done with application questions. So that was a good idea, I think, if you're worried about that and it's an in-class essay. Other people talked about research skills and so on, and that works out too. Other good examples, this person put some of their requirements in red. I wanted to highlight that, always a great idea. I thought that these sub-goals were really captured in the essay very well. This is for the science material. You can take a look at that. And then in this one, again, same idea that you are following all of Popham's rules, talking about the position you're supposed to have, and talking about your audience. And that's one of the things that I really liked about this prompt as well, because that's an important thing to consider in writing a persuasive essay. When we're thinking about ways to improve or some common mistakes that were made, so making sure that things are in alignment, right? Describe the relationship between the ocean floor and a tsunami. What's the process of the formation of a tsunami? I think this is a great short answer question or a restricted essay question, but it doesn't really get me all of the essay about how all the different physical features affect waves and currents. Because a tsunami is a wave, it's not a current. I'm missing the whole current thing, so I'm a little bit out of alignment there. But this would be a great non-essay question. Another one, why is social distancing so important when trying to stop the spread of the coronavirus? Here, right, I don't really have a mention of the different elements of a persuasive essay that I should be talking about. I'm not giving the extensiveness, the time, the points, and all that other stuff. This one I liked in that it had this idea of giving the writer some context. However, the prompt is a little vague. How will you respond? If there was a little bit more about, write a persuasive essay that you would send out to the parents of the community and so on, that would make this really great. If we keep going with some other examples, making sure you get full coverage again, explain the features of the ocean floor and its relationship with ocean waves and currents. So that's good. Use at least 2 examples of the causes of ocean waves and at least 2 examples of the types of currents. Now that sounds good on the surface, but the reason I put this in here is that it needs a little bit extra in that I can think of non-ocean floor related causes for both of those things that would result in waves and currents. And so you're not guaranteed that they're going to have to write about what you want them to write about. So make sure that you would add just one little statement about 2 examples of the causes of ocean waves and types of currents that come from the ocean floor. And then it'd be good. Essay question here, thoroughly explain how the physical features of the ocean floor influence currents and waves. Identify the differences between currents and waves. This needs a little more extensiveness again, how many of each. In terms of the differences between currents and waves, not really part of the lesson goal. And you would actually have a little extra information that doesn't give you any knowledge about what the kids can do or can't do about the goal. All right, as far as rubrics go, here's a good example, again, where these the left-hand column is basically the goal structure, and that's exactly how it should be. Each one of these things in here reflect what those goals were, and so that's really what I'm looking for here. Where people didn't quite get all the way there is some people looked at my example in the video that I was filling out, and I think I stated that I was just going to do one to save on time, but you really need to fill out all of these. That's kind of your task. So some people left some of them blank. Just have to fill those in to fix that for the future. Another thing is that sometimes they got out of alignment with the goals. So the sub-goals here explain 3 reasons for the importance of social distancing, using transition words, right? That should be then what these sub-goals are. But there's nothing about attention to audience in here. There's nothing about word choice in here. And there is nothing really about grammar, mechanics, and spelling. So I would need to make sure that these goals are perfectly reflected in my rubric. And that was the most common thing that was made. Some people went out and found existing persuasive essay rubrics and then just used that to work backwards to figure out what their goals should be. And that is totally acceptable. If you're working on a broader skill like that, you can totally find some things out there. But for specific content and specific goals like the social studies or science goal, you're probably not going to find anything out there. You can look, and maybe you'd get lucky, but it'd probably take more time. So don't go down that route when it comes to content area stuff. So I hope that helps. If you didn't get 10 out of 10 points, it's because something was a little bit off along the way, either in the prompt, in the sub-goals, or in the rubric. And if you look at that and think about this video, you should be able to figure it out. I'm going to be having you do this again, and I'll be looking for improvements in some areas in the performance assessment, which is very close to being the same thing. All right, so good luck, everybody. Good work so far, and I will see you next week.